fuck is he going to say? I thought he hit the right tone. I thought it was beautiful.
In an era when American radio was ruled by safe voices and polite conversations, one man dared to do the unthinkable: tell the truth. His name was Howard Stern. He wasn't handsome. He wasn't polite. He wasn't supposed to succeed. Yet, from behind a microphone in a cramped New York studio, Stern spoke to millions. Unfiltered, outrageous, and real. He mocked the system, challenged censorship, and turned his own flaws into entertainment gold. To some, he was a hero, the voice of freedom in a sanitized world. To others, a villain, crude, offensive, a danger to public morality. But one thing was certain: you couldn't ignore him. How did a shy, awkward kid from Queens become the king of all media, a man both feared and adored? And what did that rise to fame cost him? His family, his peace, his soul. This is not just the story of a radio shock jock. It's the story of a man who redefined honesty, who learned that sometimes the loudest noise comes from the quietest pain. Howard Allen Stern was born on January 12, 1954, in Queens, New York, a city that never stopped talking. But inside his childhood home, the noise was different. His father, Ben Stern, was a recording engineer at a radio station, a man of precision, discipline, and temper. His mother, Ray, was warm but anxious, often lost between affection and worry. In that mix of love and chaos, young Howard learned two things: to listen carefully and to escape into imagination. At school, he was the quiet kid, tall and awkward, with thick glasses and a deep discomfort around others. He didn't fit in. Not with the cool kids, not with the tough ones. But when he got his hands on a microphone, a small toy one his father brought home, something changed. Alone in his room, he would mimic radio hosts, perform fake interviews, and invent entire shows only he could hear. The microphone became his shield, a portal to a world where confidence wasn't punished. It was celebrated. Still, beneath the laughter, there was fear. His father's voice often thundered through the house. "Shut up! You don't know what you're talking about." Those words burned deep, shaping the rebellious defiance that would later define his career. Howard wasn't born brave. He was born scared, and spent a lifetime fighting that fear with honesty. By the time he reached high school, Stern already knew his destiny wasn't in numbers or books. It was in voices. He wanted to speak, to be heard, to say what others were too afraid to say. No one could have imagined that the shy boy mumbling into a plastic mic would one day command an empire by daring to never shut up again. After graduating from Boston University in 1976 with a degree in communications, Howard Stern was ready, or so he thought, to conquer the airwaves. But success didn't come easily. He began at small-town radio stations, WRNW in Briarcliff Manor, WCCC in Hartford, WWDC in Washington, D.C., places where the coffee was bad and the dreams were even smaller. His paychecks barely covered rent, his bosses hated his improvisations, and his sense of humor, raw, unfiltered, sarcastic, terrified the management. Most stations wanted polite, predictable voices. Howard gave them chaos wrapped in charisma. He mocked commercials, joked about politics, teased his own co-hosts. Everywhere he went, listeners loved him, and executives fired him. But with every rejection, he refined his style, building a character that was brutally honest, self-deprecating, and fearless. Then came 1982, WNBC New York, the big leagues. It was his dream job, and his biggest test. For the first time, he was broadcasting to millions. But his irreverent style clashed violently with corporate radio culture. Producers tried to tame him, scripts were rewritten, and warnings piled up. Yet every time Stern opened the mic, he said what no one else dared. He was the outsider refusing to play by the rules of the insiders. One morning, he did what would define his future. He ignored the program director's orders and spoke freely for an hour. The switchboards lit up. Listeners laughed, argued, and couldn't turn away. The ratings spiked overnight. Howard Stern had found his voice. the one that could both offend and unite. He wasn't just another DJ anymore. He was a movement waiting to explode, a revolution disguised as entertainment. By the mid-1980s, the Howard Stern Show had become something America had never heard before. Raw, fearless, and utterly unpredictable. Every morning, millions tuned in not for news or music, but for honesty wrapped in chaos. It wasn't just a radio show, it was a cultural earthquake. Howard built a team that became family. Robin Quivers, the intelligent and sharp-witted co-host who kept him grounded. Fred Norris, the sound wizard who turned jokes into symphonies of madness. And Gary Delabate, the loyal producer navigating the storm behind the glass. Together they created a world where celebrities were roasted, taboos were shattered, and laughter was brutally real. But success came with battle lines. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, began targeting Stern for indecency, issuing fines that climbed into the millions. Advertisers threatened to pull out, politicians called him a menace, and radio executives tried, and failed, to silence him. Each attack only fueled the legend. The more they tried to shut him down, the more people listened. By the late 80s, Stern was syndicated across major cities: New York, Philadelphia, Washington, Los Angeles, turning local radio into a national spectacle. He called himself the king of all media, half joking, half prophesying, and soon it wasn't a joke at all. His interviews became must-see moments, brutally honest, uncomfortable but strangely human. He didn't flatter celebrities. He exposed them. Every word, every laugh, every argument felt alive. Behind the microphone, Stern was untouchable, a man who turned rebellion into empire. But behind the curtain, he was still fighting fear. Of failure, of loneliness, of becoming the very thing he mocked. As the 1990s dawned, Howard Stern wasn't just a voice on the radio. He was a phenomenon, both worshipped and despised, standing at the crossroads of fame and infamy. And while America debated whether he was genius or garbage, Howard Stern simply turned up the volume. The 1990s were the age of Howard Stern. His voice ruled the mornings of America. From New York to Los Angeles, millions began their day with laughter, shock, and the unmistakable sound of rebellion. Every insult, every confession, every outrageous stunt became front-page news. He wasn't just a broadcaster anymore, he was the story. In 1993, his autobiography, Private Parts, hit bookstores, raw, raunchy, and brutally honest. Critics dismissed it as trash. Readers made it a #1 New York Times bestseller. 3 years later, Stern starred in its film adaptation, Private Parts, 1997, playing himself in a cinematic retelling of his own chaos. Against all odds, the movie was a hit. Funny, self-aware, and surprisingly touching. It cemented his title, the king of all media. He had conquered radio, television, publishing, and now film. His salary reached tens of millions a year. Billboards of his face dominated Times Square. He was interviewed, imitated, and feared. In a country obsessed with fame, Stern was its loudest mirror. But at the top of the mountain, the air grew thin. His marriage to Allison, his college sweetheart, began to crumble under fame's weight. Years of long hours, controversy, and public scrutiny eroded what once felt sacred. He filled the silence with more work, more shows, more interviews, more noise. Beneath the laughter, Stern was haunted by the question, if everyone's listening, why do I still feel alone? He surrounded himself with fame, yet grew distant from family and peace. Friends noticed the change. He was still hilarious, still sharp, but a quiet melancholy lingered behind the bravado. By the end of the decade, Howard Stern stood at the height of everything he had dreamed of, and the edge of everything he was about to lose. He had built an empire on truth, but the truth was starting to hurt. By the late 1990s, Howard Stern had become a cultural lightning rod, a man both worshipped and despised. Every word he said was dissected. Every joke, every bit, every headline fueled outrage. To his fans, he was the only one brave enough to tell the truth. To his critics, he was corrupting America one broadcast at a time. The Federal Communications Commission, FCC, made Stern its favorite target. Over 2 decades, the agency fined radio stations airing his show more than $2.5 million for indecency. Politicians demanded his removal. Religious groups protested outside his studios. TV hosts called him a moral plague. And every time they tried to shut him down, Howard doubled down. He laughed at the outrage, mocking the very institutions that condemned him. He called the FCC America's Ministry of Boredom. To Stern, censorship wasn't just a rule, it was the enemy. And in fighting it, he became a symbol of something far bigger than radio: freedom of speech. But the war had its price. Sponsors pulled out. Networks grew nervous. Behind the scenes, Stern's team felt the pressure. Constant legal battles, stress, sleepless nights. Even for a man who thrived on chaos, the constant fight was exhausting. Still, Howard refused to bend. He believed that truth, even ugly truth, deserved a microphone. And while others sanitized their voices for approval, he let his echo ring louder. In the end, the same controversy that nearly destroyed him made him immortal. Howard Stern was no longer just a radio host. He was the man who broke the system and made America question where decency ends and freedom begins. But soon, the shock jock who ruled the airwaves would face a new kind of challenge, one not from censors or critics, but from within himself. By the early 2000s, Howard Stern's kingdom was collapsing under its own noise. The FCC fines kept piling up, advertisers fled, and a new generation of listeners was drifting toward the internet, a wild frontier where anyone could speak freely. For the first time in decades, the king of all media felt trapped in the very system he once dominated. Then, in 2004, he made a move that stunned the entire broadcasting world. Howard Stern left terrestrial radio behind and signed a $500 million deal with Sirius Satellite Radio. To his fans, it was a declaration of war against censorship. To his enemies, it was career suicide. When he flipped the switch on Sirius XM in 2006, no one knew what to expect. Would people pay to hear him? Would the rebel still matter in a digital age? They did, and he did. Within months, Sirius subscriptions skyrocketed. Stern had once again reinvented himself, turning exile into revolution. Free from government regulation, his show became rawer, funnier, and surprisingly, deeper. The interviews grew more intimate, the laughter more reflective. The man who once mocked emotion began showing it. But change wasn't just professional. It was personal. After his divorce, Stern confronted the loneliness that fame couldn't fix. He discovered therapy, meditation, and painting, finding peace in the silence he once feared. He remarried, rebuilt his relationships, and learned to listen more than he talked. The shock jock who once shouted to be heard had evolved into a man who understood the power of quiet. In the process, he proved that rebellion isn't just about breaking rules. It's about breaking patterns. Howard Stern was no longer just shocking America. He was teaching it that even the loudest voices can learn to heal. Today, Howard Stern stands as one of the most influential and misunderstood figures in American media history. From the boy hiding behind a toy microphone to the man commanding millions of listeners, his voice has echoed through 5 decades of cultural change. He was called vulgar, offensive, even dangerous. Yet beneath the noise, he gave people something few entertainers dared to offer: truth. Through laughter, discomfort, and brutal honesty, he made America confront itself, its obsessions, insecurities, and hypocrisy. Over time, the very thing that made him controversial became what made him timeless. He turned confession into connection. He made imperfection feel human. And when the world shifted toward podcasts and on-demand content, Stern was already there, a pioneer who paved the way for unfiltered voices everywhere. But perhaps his greatest transformation wasn't on the air. It was within. The man once addicted to controversy now speaks of therapy, humility, and compassion. He still interviews celebrities, but now with empathy instead of mockery. He asks about pain, childhood, fear, because he's lived it all. Howard Stern's legacy isn't just shock radio. It's evolution. It's the courage to change while staying true to the self beneath the performance. He spent a lifetime speaking so others could be heard, and in doing so, he found his own humanity. The once angry rebel became something greater, a teacher, a survivor, a man finally at peace with his voice. From the cramped radio booths of Queens to the billion-dollar studios of Sirius XM, Howard Stern's journey is more than a story of fame. It's a story of defiance, transformation, and redemption. He broke every rule, angered every critic, and somehow became the voice of a generation. He taught us that honesty can be ugly, that humor can heal, and that sometimes the only way to find yourself is to stop pretending. The kid who once hid behind his microphone became a man who used it to speak truth, not just about the world, but about himself. In the end, Howard Stern didn't just change radio, he changed the conversation. He made people laugh, think, and feel something real in a world built on performance. Because in every age, there's someone brave enough to say what others won't. And sometimes, that voice doesn't just echo through the airwaves, it echoes through time. Subscribe for more untold Hollywood journeys, where truth meets legend.